everybody. It's Miss Johnson back today with another story. Today we're going to change gears a little bit. We've been talking a lot about some informational text on animals and creatures that we see in the spring. And today this is another animal that you might see running around in your yard in the spring. But this is going to be a make-believe story. So this is just going to have some characteristics of a make-believe story. This book is called Rabbit Stew. And we know when we read books that are make-believe, they have certain things in them. So I'm going to stop for a second. I want you to think and answer to yourself, what type of things are we going to see in a make-believe story? What type of things will this book have? I'll give you just a second. Hopefully you said some things like this book's going to have characters. It's going to have a setting to tell and tell us where the story takes place. And it's going to have a beginning, middle, and end. So those are some characteristics of fiction make-believe books. Now, like we were saying, rabbits are a creature that we see a lot in the spring, an animal. I know here at our house we've seen some rabbits already and some little babies too. But in our book, Rabbit Stew, we can tell from the cover of the book that our characters aren't just going to be rabbits. Hopefully you see this large dog appears looking at a book. And it also looks like he has lots of vegetables surrounding him. I see some tomatoes and potatoes and onions and carrots. This book is written by Donna Casso and it's illustrated by Tamra Pertoni. So let's see what happens in our story, Rabbit Stew. Now, before we read our book, Rabbit Stew, I want you to think for just a minute after looking at the front cover. Make a prediction of what you think is going to happen in this story. All right, so here's our title page, Rabbit Stew by Donna Casso. Once again, this is interesting because we see 3 rabbits and one of them is in a pot. It appears reading some type of book. So already in my head, I'm using my metacognition. I'm going to think about my thinking and think about, okay, what room in the house has big pots and vegetables and types of books? Hopefully you're thinking kitchen. Once a while back, in a rickety old shack, there lived a dog. He wasn't very smart. He didn't have much money, but he was happy. The dog had a garden, and it was laid out in nice, neat rows, and it was nestled in a sunny meadow. In the spring, the dog planted seeds in his garden, and in the summer, he cared for the plants and he watched them grow. Then he would pick and eat the vegetables that he had grown. The dog loved his garden so much. Here's his seeds, and he's planted all his things in nice, neat rows, and looks like he's grown some eggplant and broccoli and tomatoes, all different kinds of vegetables, carrots. But the dog had one big problem. Hungry rabbits would sneak into his garden and nibble on his vegetables. They made holes in his cabbage leaves. They dug up his carrots and potatoes, and they chewed on his parsley. The dog tried chasing the rabbits away, but they always came back. So let's stop and think for a minute. The dog has a problem. Tell yourself out loud or somebody that's watching with you what problem the dog is having. Okay. Then one day the dog looked out his window and he saw those darn rabbits eating all of his tender new lettuce plants. That was the last straw. The dog ran into the garden and he chased those rabbits around and around until he caught them with a leap and a pounce. Thought the dog, now what should I do with these pesky rabbits? Maybe I'll make me some rabbit stew. Yes, I think that's what I'll do. Uh-oh, they've been caught. So the dog took the rabbits inside and he put them in a large cooking pot. Then he opened his cookbook, but he couldn't find a recipe for rabbit stew, and he just didn't know what to do. So now we know what that book was for, and he's looking for a recipe. Turn and tell somebody or say out loud what a recipe is. Hopefully you said it's some type of instructions or a list of how you cook something. And he's having trouble finding one for his rabbit stew. Now before I turn the page, what do you think he's going to do now that he can't find a recipe? Let's see if your prediction was right. One clever little rabbit spoke up. Clever. You could go out to the garden and you could get some carrots to put in the stew. Good idea, thought the dog. So he said to those little rabbits, wait right here while I go out to the garden and get some carrots. And the little rabbits nodded their heads and said, oh yes, we'll try our best. But as soon as the dog went out to the garden, those rabbits leaped from the pot and scampered happily out the door. When the dog returned, he saw that all the rabbits were gone. He dropped the carrots into the pot, and he was feeling a little disappointed. Notice when the illustrator drew this picture, he didn't even show Dog's head. He only showed the rabbits. Think to yourself why he didn't even want to show you the dog, that he only wanted to show you the rabbits going out the door. Hopefully you thought about that the rabbits right now are doing something very important in the story. They're escaping. So he didn't really want you to concentrate on what the dog was doing. He wanted to make sure you knew what the rabbits were up to. So let's see what the dog can do now, because all he has so far are carrots in the pot. Well, the next day when the dog looked out his window, those rabbits were nibbling on some onions. So the dog chased them around and around until he caught them at last with a leap and a pounce. And then he took those rabbits back inside and he put them back in the large cooking pot. Now, said the dog, I have rabbits and carrots to make my rabbit stew. And he doesn't look very happy. Then one little rabbit said, but you must have some celery for rabbit stew. You're sure? Said the dog. Okay, I'll go out to the garden to get some celery. But this time, you have to remember to stay in the pot, okay? The little rabbits nodded their heads and said, oh yes, we'll try our best. Now think to yourself if you think those rabbits are actually going to stay in the pot. Make your prediction. But as soon as the dog went out to the garden, all the rabbits scampered happily out the door. When the dog came back, he saw that the rabbits were gone. As he put the celery in the pot, he thought to himself, those rabbits, they're just not very smart. They forgot to stay in my pot again. Now let's stop and think. The dog thinks that the rabbits aren't very smart. Because they didn't stay in the pot. I wonder what you think, if it's the rabbits that aren't smart or the dog. The next day, the hungry rabbits sneaked into the garden again. So the dog chased them around and around until he caught them at last with a leap and a pounce. And then he put those rabbits back in that large cooking pot. I have rabbits and carrots and celery, said the dog. Now I can make my rabbit stew. But you must have potatoes and onions to make rabbit stew, said one clever rabbit. Yes, I know, said the dog, and he was trying to look smart. But if I go out in that garden, you rabbits will forget to stay in the pot. After thinking for a little bit, one of the rabbits said, you could shut the door. Then we couldn't run out that way. Good idea, thought the dog. And then he said to the rabbits, now, you stay in the pot while I go dig up some potatoes and onions. The rabbits nodded their heads and said, oh yes, we'll try our best. Notice they said, we'll try our best. They didn't say they would. But remember, they made a promise. They're not going out the door because he shut it. Well, out to the garden the dog went, and he closed the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, the rabbits leaped to the window and they jumped out. Then away they ran, and they were sure glad they had fooled that dog again. But notice how proud the dog looks because he thinks he's really smart. When the dog came back, he saw that the rabbits were gone. He put the potatoes and onions in the pot, and to his surprise, that pot was full to the top with vegetables. There was no room for the rabbits. "Oh, it's just as well that those rabbits are gone," said the dog, "because they wouldn't even fit in the pot anyway. I'll just make some rabbit stew without the rabbits." And then he felt very proud of himself for such a good idea. Happily, the dog poured some water into the pot. He turned on the stove and he cooked his rabbit stew, and it smelled delicious. And for supper, he ate 3 big bowls of stew. And then, when he couldn't just eat another bite, the dog even put some of the leftover stew outside for the rabbits. "After all," he said to himself, "those rabbits might not be very smart, but they sure know how to make a good rabbit stew." The end. Now, after hearing that story, I want you to think, who was actually the smartest character in the story? The rabbits or the dog? And think about why. I'll give you just a second. Hopefully you realize that the rabbits were actually the smartest characters because not only did they keep tricking the dog, but they were able to get all the ingredients and eat some delicious rabbit stew. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get started on talking to you about what Miss Johnson might like for you to write about our story. Okay? After reading this book, instead of writing maybe some information about rabbits and things, I was thinking that you might want to write to me this time about what your favorite part of the story was. What happened in the story that was your favorite part? Or maybe write to me about who your favorite character was and why. So one of those 2 things, who your favorite character was in the book, the rabbits or the dog, and why they were your favorite, or what your favorite part of the story was and why. Okay? And remember, this is called Rabbit Stew. Now that we heard our story, let's do a little practice with some words that were in our story today. One of the words they used a lot in our story, and before we start, try to have either a board or a piece of paper and a pencil. So either a whiteboard and marker or a piece of paper and a pencil, and we'll practice some of our spelling. I want to pause for just a second while you get those things. Okay? All right. We're going to start off with one of the words that we heard in our story, which was garden. Now, when we talk about the word garden, we know that's a 2-part word, garden. So we can spell it in 2 parts. But let's try tapping it out first. Ready? Get your tappers up. G-A-R-D-N. Now, that one's kind of tricky because a lot of us might go G-A-R-D-N. It's not a garden, it's a garden. Okay, so let's try that again. G-A-R-D-N. Now, let's try writing it. How about I give you a few seconds to try it. G-A-R-D-N. Let's check your work. Oh, okay, I hear R, but we know all words have vowels, so we spell that with A-R. Guard. Short E, because you heard that garden. All right, I'm sure most of you got a lot of those letters right, so give yourself a pat on the back. Great job. Okay, another word that we talked about in our story that we're going to practice spelling is shack, because the dog lived in a rickety old shack. All right, so let's tap that out. Shack. Shack. 3 sounds, but there's more letters than that. And remember, I heard a short vowel, and it ends with a K, so you should know the rule. Try spelling shack. All right, let's check it. Ooh, And remember, it's short A, so we use our CK, shack. That's like a little old house. Great job. I hope you got your CK on that word. All right, let's try our next one. Our next one would be make. That should be a pretty easy one for you. Let's try it. M-A-K. 3 sounds, but we're going to have 4 letters, and you should know why. Try it. M-A-K. All right. Let's see if you match Miss Johnson's. M-A-K. Now, I hear that K at the end, but I know it's a long vowel word, so I have to use K. If I leave it like that, is it going to say make? No, it says mac. We have to have that magic sneaky E on the end to make the vowel say its name. All right, let's try one more. Oops, I did it again, guys. Sorry about that. Let's try another one. Inside. Inside. That's a 2-syllable word. So we should all know how to spell the little word in. Try that. And now we're ready for side. Side. 3 sounds, but 4 letters. See if you got this. Inside. Inside. All right. And last but not least, Miss Johnson picked a word from the story, and it's got a rule that we talked about before we were out of school. The word is dropped. Now, when I say dropped, that has an ending on it. I dropped the eggs. Sounds like it ends with a T, but we know dropped is an action word. It's a verb. And we know when we hear that T sound on the end of an action word, it's actually spelled with an ED. But remember, ED had some special sounds. Sometimes it just says duh. Sometimes ED actually says ed. And then sometimes, like in our word, ED can make the T sound. Okay? So in our word dropped, it sounds like it ends with a T, but we're going to have to remember it's an action word, so we spell that sound with an ED. So let's go back and think of what our root word is. Dropped. The root word is just drop. So let's tap that out. D-R-A-P. Drop. D-R-A-P. Drop. But now we're trying to make it say dropped. Now here's the tricky part. Before you put your ending on, think about this is a short vowel word followed by 1 consonant. What are you going to do? Are you just going to put the ED on? Or are you going to do something special? Hopefully you remember to do this. Dropped. Oh, that's a short O word with 1 consonant, so I have to double the P and add my ED. Dropped. Remember, on action words, when we're putting endings on them, like ED or ING, if it's a short vowel word followed by 1 consonant, you double that last consonant before you put your ending on. Dropped. Okay? Awesome work. Now, we're going to add one new thing today before we go to our lesson. Since we learned about rabbits, I'm going to give you a math problem. So on your board, be ready to see if you can come up with an equation to match my story. One day, there were 12 rabbits in the yard. Some of the rabbits hopped away. Now, there's only 7 left. How would you solve that? There were 12 rabbits in the yard. Some of the rabbits hopped away. Ooh, some hopped away. Don't know how many. Now, there are 7 left. We know when we have a problem like that, we start with our largest number. How many did we begin with? 12. We don't know how many went away, but you heard us use those magic words, went away. So hopefully you knew that meant we're going to have to subtract. We don't know what goes in that blank, but we have 7 left. Now it's your job to figure out what the missing number is. There's lots of ways to solve that. For me, I would go to the 7 and I would say, what do I put with 7 to get back to 12? And I would use counting up. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And that gives me 5. Some of you might have decided to do it like a number bond. I have 12. I know there's 7. And you might know that you count up to get the 5 there. But I know there's somebody out there in my audience that solved it a different way. If you solved my math problem a different way, you must have used addition. So you must have said, well, altogether there was 12 rabbits. I know there are 7. What goes with 7 to give me 12? And you would have still gotten 5. Always remember to circle the answer that you have to answer the math question, which was how many rabbits left, and it was 5. Okay? All right, please share with me anything that you got out of the lesson today, whether it was math, spelling, or whatever you want to write to me about the book Rabbit Stew. I hope all of you guys are having a great day, and don't forget we'll have a Zoom call on Mondays and Thursdays, so be sure you try to tune in for those. They're at 7 o'clock, and Miss Johnson sends you all the information to know how to join us. I miss you guys. Love you lots. Bye.